Christmas and horror aren't two things you'd necessarily think would go together. You know, when you think Christmas and Christmas movies, you tend to think holly jolly, not murder, worder. But Christmas horror is a thing, like enough of a thing to be completely its own genre, saturated with titles. This is not limited to one or two movies that just kind of had this concept but otherwise exist in a vacuum. In fact, Christmas horror has kind of always been a thing. Long before even film itself existed, have Christmas and winter set narratives flirted with the macabre, going as far back as the 1600s with Shakespeare's play The Winter's Tale, which, in spite of its upbeat comedic ending, still had its fair share of mad jealous kings, poisonings, dead children, and bear maulings. Not exactly chestnuts over an open fire stuff. Hamlet even, in fact, arguably one of Shakespeare's greatest achievements and most famous of tragedies, a story of revenge, murder, ghosts, and questionable sanity, is in fact set at Christmas, as suggested when the character Marcellus tries to reassure himself, Horatio, and Bernardo that they haven't seen a ghost, claiming, "Some say that ever against that season comes wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated. This bird of dawning singeth all night long, and then they say, no spirit dare stir abroad. The nights are wholesome, then no planet strike, no fairy takes, nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and so gracious is the time." Which basically translates to, lads, there cannot be a ghost. It's baby Jesus' birthday. And the connection only gets stronger as we go into the Victorian era, where they exchange cards that look like this. What in the name of Christ are these things? And also, it was tradition then to exchange ghost stories on Christmas Eve, which might seem weird now, but that tradition was around long enough and made significant enough historical impact that it's even referenced in a song that's still played every December in basically everywhere to this day. And you probably didn't even notice. Third verse, fourth line of Andy Williams' "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year." Go read it. Seriously, it mentions this. Oh, and let's not forget that Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, probably the most famous and beloved and retold Christmas story of all time, is, for all intents and purposes, a ghost story.
Spirit, I fear you more than any spectre I have yet met.
That was a scene from a movie that heavily features Kermit the Frog just there. So perhaps Shakespeare put it best then in that first scene of the second act of The Winter's Tale when he wrote, "A sad tale's best for winter. I have one of sprites and goblins." So let's look at some of those Christmas sprites and goblins, yeah! Now at this point, we've established that the Christmas season and horror don't necessarily make us strange bedfellows as you would initially believe. The question then, I guess though, is why? Why can horror and Christmas stories go so well with each other when theoretically they should be such polar opposites? Christmas ain't Halloween. It's a tradition that thrives on the idea of the happy feelings. It's a time of joy and love and giving and all the other shit that Hallmark tell you so you'll buy their overpriced cards. Do these conflicting things even gel well at all? Am I just assuming this because there's a history to these connections when actually it's just a thing of the past? Is the Christmas horror genre still relevant today in film, one of the most prominent storytelling industries in the world? And if so, where are all the Christmas horror movies and how do they slip through the cracks and past producers in a sea of more traditionally festive productions for which there is always a huge demand? Well, okay, first off, before we talk about why Christmas horror can be so good, let's talk about where it came from. Christmas horror isn't exactly massively mainstream when it comes to films, and even television, but it has had its fair share of history and impactful big hitters. The earliest Christmas horror movie box office release I could find dates back as far as 1945 with the British anthology horror movie Dead of Night, a super interesting film where a man visits a mansion only to find he recognises all of its residents from dreams he has had, each of them with their own haunting tale that makes up the film's shorts. Dead of Night is most well known for its closing story, The Ventriloquist Dummy, which, admittedly while brilliant and definitely the big takeaway from the movie, has nothing to do with the holiday season. Though people forget that there is also quite the chilling, albeit brief, little Christmas ghost story in this film's second tale, The Christmas Party, about a game of hide and seek that goes to some spooky places. However, this was only a small segment in an otherwise Christmas-free production, but it did mark, at least to my knowledge, the first time that old tradition of merging fear with festivity came in the form of a major visual release. It wouldn't be until 1961, however, with The Twilight Zone, which, if you watch my wholesome Halloween video on Little Shop of Horrors, you'll know is one of my favourite things on the planet, that we got our first dedicated Christmas story in a moving visual medium, with the episode 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. Not the show's first Christmas tale, that honour belongs to Night of the Meek, but you'll be hard pressed to call that one a horror. That's not the case though with 5 Characters in Search of an Exit, which is a bleak but brilliant existential nightmare that sees a homeless man, a clown, a ballet dancer, a bagpiper, and an army major awakening in a large metal cylinder, with seemingly no escape, no memories of how they got there or who they are, and no idea what awaits them outside their strange dark imprisonment. The final shot of this thing is particularly harrowing, especially considering the time period. It is not one to watch to fill you with merriment, put it that way. Things really began to pick up in the genre though in the 70s, when we started to see our first full-length theatrical releases of Christmas horror movies. Firstly, with the British effort, Whoever Slew Auntie Roo in 1971, which is good, pretty good. It's not an absolute standout, and it's definitely a little slow paced by today's standards, but it's surprisingly not that tame, especially for the time period. It has its fair share of creepy bits, as well as a wonderfully hammy lead performance by Shelley Winters, who plays a genuinely sympathetic villain who's lost her daughter and goes insane with grief, kidnapping orphans in the hopes of filling the void that loss left. I really think the opening moments where she's singing to a sleeping child only for the camera to reveal it's a decomposing corpse when she walks away is kind of shocking. I mean, this is 1971. That's a pretty bold opening image. The rest of the film is kind of a modernized Christmas set retelling of Hansel and Gretel. Auntie Roo is sort of a stand-in for the Witch in the Woods, seemingly kind of first to the two child leads, a brother and sister duo enticed by her by the promise of a Christmas party, but later is revealed to be a dangerous threat. They even escape her grasp in the end by burning her alive in what's essentially a makeshift oven, just like in the fairy tale, and close on a narration that references the old Brothers Grimm story. I probably wouldn't have mentioned this one too much were it not so notable for being the first theatrical horror feature to hit that Christmas setting milestone, but that feels notable. Also notable, not in a historical sense, but notable to me specifically, is this film's marvellous poster tagline, "Say goodnight to Auntie Roo, kiddies, it's dead time." Fantastic. Anyway, it was around this time the whole subgenre kind of spread like wildfire for a bit. We got America's first effort with Silent Night, Bloody Night in 1972, Home for the Holidays went direct to TV only 11 days later, and British anthology film Tales from the Crypt gave us our first Santa-dressed killer in the same year. Later, the Italians got in on the action with Last Stop on the Night Train, or The Night Train Murders depending on what country you're in, and alongside all of this in the television world, the BBC would annually run a series of standalone shorts between 30 to 50 minutes in length, all under the moniker A Ghost Story for Christmas between 1971 and 1978. The thing that really put the idea of merging Christmas with creepy into the public consciousness though was Canada's 1974 film Black Christmas, a fantastic gem of a slasher movie following the story of sorority house sisters being picked off one by one in their school's Christmas break by a creepy and relentless masked killer. This was the holiday horror subgenre's first truly standout commercial success, grossing a box office of over $4 million on a budget of just over $600,000. And it did this 4 years before Halloween debuted and repeated that slasher success story. It was actually also a big influence on Carpenter's creative classic, so now you know who you have to really thank for one of the greatest horror movies of all time and the immortal icon that is Michael Myers. Sanda. It was probably thanks in part to this success then that by the time the 80s rolled round, we were still seeing the subgenre quietly continue to pump out new titles rather than fade into the ether as a forgotten trend of its time. Instead, we got our first and possibly to this day the only truly mainstream Christmas horror with one of my all-time favourite movies, Joe Dante's 1984 feature, Gremlins. the heavily merchandised, franchise-spawning blockbuster phenomenon about mischievous monsters that spawn from a mysterious little creature bought as a Christmas present and begin to wreak havoc on the local town. God, this movie is fun as hell. Granted, as far as horror goes, Gremlins is certainly on the softer and more playful side of things, but it still has one foot planted firmly in the horror genre, with grisly, child-scaring scenes like the gremlin exploding in the microwave, the elderly woman thrown from her window, and the bizarrely grim backstory about one of the characters finding her dad's rotten corpse in the chimney at 9 years old. That was a really weird bit. And then, on top of our big, whopping mainstream hit, the 80s even saw the genre's first huge controversy: Silent Night, Deadly Night. A really not all that special movie that caused a huge moral panic due to its promotional material, which heavily pushed its killer Santa narrative.
Something that, as I've already mentioned, had been done before in Tales from the Crypt.
And actually also happened in another 80s movie called Christmas Evil. But for some reason, this was just the time that everybody decided to get upset about it. Parents complained about children being frightened of Santa because of the posters and adverts. The Parent-Teacher Association campaigned to have the film removed from theatres. People protested it, and in a really cool little bit of film history, renowned critics Siskel and Ebert slated it as one of the most contemptible films they had ever seen on their show, and famously, Siskel listed the names of the production studios involved, as well as the writer, producer, and director of the movie, and told them they should be ashamed of themselves. And with all this going on, the film got pulled. But in horror, that kind of controversy is a badge of honor sometimes. You tell people they shouldn't watch something, they're gonna want to watch it more. And the movie ended up taking home a cool 2.4 mil in its extremely short run, despite being a bit shite, to be honest. Not a great film. So after a massive mainstream hit and a reputation boost off the back of its video nasty label, it was safe to say at this point, Christmas horror was firmly on the map in the film world. Still small, but definitely there and not going anywhere anytime soon. But the question of why is still there. We now know how these films get made. People saw there was an audience there for it, and there were a few that made good money. But why is there an audience there for it? Who wants this? The answer is me. I want this. I want this a lot. Who wants to take the most wonderful time of the year and filter it through a creepy, dark lens? Again, me, but also a lot of other people, and I think there's a really good reason for this. I can only speak for myself here, but the reason I like Christmas horrors is because they acknowledge that Christmas can be kind of horrible. And I don't mean to say that I hate Christmas. I don't. I love Christmas. It's great fun. But it's fun that comes with a financial burden, stress, tight work deadlines, demanding social interactions, often with people whose politics you don't quite agree with. It's a stressful time. And for the longest period, films didn't want to seem to admit that. The general output of Christmas movies seems to exist within this realm of the winter wonderland, a world where often the biggest conflict is shit like deciding whether to shut down the cookie factory or not. And don't get me wrong, there's some amazing standout traditional Christmas films, but the genre is so saturated with this milquetoast romantic white upper middle class fantasy land of snowfall on cozy little towns, and that's just not real. It's a complete falsehood. It's borderline propaganda, totally in denial of the very real challenging elements and burdens of the season. And there's only so many times you can watch the big city girl go back to her hometown where some sweater-clad hunk with a big heart of gold teaches her the true meaning of Christmas, abandoning her hopes and dreams and settling for a dude she just met, before you think, hey, you know what? I'm starting to think that these movies might be a little insincere. I don't think these films believe in the spirit of Christmas at all, but are in fact a transparent but highly effective marketing campaign in order to increase brand recognition for the largest manufacturer of greeting cards. And then Christmas horror comes along, and it has the decency to say, yeah, shit's sometimes hard, man. And what a breath of fresh air that feels like. Granted, it often says this through the medium of monsters and serial killers, which in itself is equally improbable and unrealistic, but it can just feel so much more honest because it's not patronizing you. It's telling a story with wild elements, but it isn't outright lying. These films can cover issues like financial difficulties and family conflicts and the mental health strain, but it doesn't feel glazed over or out of place, because even though Christmas horror can still have the optimistic hope of the holidays threaded throughout and be quite loving at times, it also isn't drowning you in some kind of sickly sweet saccharine gumdrop gingerbread house wonderland full of pretty people with pretty houses and pretty trees and pretty smiles. Christmas horror, when it's good, is really good. It has a unique ability to offer one of the best things that horror can offer: a safe space to explore our darker fears and anxieties in an escapist manner. But even more specifically, our anxieties around a holiday that we're otherwise supposed to pretend at all times is the best thing in the world, with absolutely no problems whatsoever. What are you talking about, financial burdens? Don't be a Scrooge. What do you mean the holidays make you sad? What are you, the Grinch? Didn't you listen to the song? It's the most wonderful time of the year. Just don't ask questions and buy an iPhone or your kids won't love you. Christmas horror cuts through the crap. It's not without its flaws. Making a film in the genre alone isn't a recipe for instant success, and it's actually kind of become its own little Hallmark channel in a way, because it's popular enough with its niche audience that there's kind of a formula to pump these things out now. There is a lot of Christmas horror crap out there. It's a problem with all horror basically, since it's seen as a cheap and easy genre with a built-in audience. We get a lot of rubbish, and the Christmas horror subgenre is no exception to this problem. I mean, did we really need 5 Silent Night, Deadly Night movies? And a remake? Granted, the second one is a fantastic living meme, so I'll give you that one was needed.
Garbage Day! Huh? No!
This subgenre has a wide range of titles, with an equally wide range in quality. For every one movie that's as good as Gremlins, there's at least like 5 not-so-classic titles, like Santa's Sleigh, or Santa Claus, or Ginger Dead Man, or Ginger Dead Man 2 Passion of the Crust, or Ginger Dead Man 3 Saturday Night Cleaver, or Ginger Dead Man 4 Ginger Dead Man vs. Evil Bong. There's a lot of Ginger Dead Man movies. I think you might have got that note now. So with that much rubbish out there, it can now be a little hard to find the diamonds in the rough. So if you'll allow me a quick tangent, I'd like to briefly spotlight 4 of my favourites I haven't already mentioned in this video. Firstly, we have Krampus, a wickedly fun Christmas horror movie about a chaotic family gathering with a bickering, politically and financially divided group of dysfunctional individuals who have to put aside their differences and become closer as a family unit when their home is targeted by Krampus, the horned demon of European folklore. This film is an absolute blast from start to finish. It's a practical effects extravaganza with some of the most incredible creature design you'll ever see. An extended sequence with the family fighting off a slew of monstrous creatures in their attic is an absolute show stealer that showcases an amazing amount of creative puppetry, and while it has an extremely bleak ending, like, dude, it's still a fun tongue-in-cheek flick with a wholesome family dynamic at its core that never shies away from some of the bigger stresses of the season. Second is Rare Exports, an absolutely wild Finnish film that follows a young boy Pietari and his father Rauno, who live next to a mountain in Lapland where a team of British researchers are attempting to excavate the original Santa Claus, who is not the jolly red fellow Coca-Cola have taught us all to love, but rather an ancient demon with a terrifying hunger for children. Drawing from Finnish folklore and with an incredibly well realised snow-covered setting, Rare Exports is a wild film, full of surprising twists and turns, and a decent amount of disturbing, uncomfortable stares from a naked old man. It's a strange film, but one with a great father-son dynamic at its heart. And unlike Krampus, its ending is kinda happy. I think. I'm not sure. It's an odd film, and it goes to some places you definitely wouldn't expect. Thirdly, Anna and the Apocalypse is a low-budget British zombie Christmas musical. And if that sentence doesn't immediately sell you on this thing, we operate on very different levels. The film follows Anna and her friends who are just about to finish sixth form when a massive zombie infection hits their neighbourhood. And so Anna and her mates must sing and fight their way out of town, hopefully saving their family along the way. This film has real Buffy musical episode vibes. It's fun, it's charming, it's cheesy, the characters are all super likeable with the exception of the genuinely loathable villain headmaster, and Anna is an effortlessly charming lead you'll no doubt root for the second you see her dancing her way through the streets with her headphones in, unaware of the huge zombie apocalypse happening behind her. I will say though, this film is surprisingly bleak, just as a heads up. That said, the sadness blow is definitely softened when all the tragedy is sandwiched between catchy musical numbers. And they are catchy. No Such Thing as a Hollywood Ending is a bop, and lyrically speaking, feels like the perfect counterpunch to the exact kind of Christmas movie that these films aren't. It's still pretty bleak though. I realise I'm recommending a lot of bleak movies in this video, which is kinda backwards, really. You remember when I did a video every day in October to celebrate Halloween, but focused exclusively on positive, happy films for the Grimm season? Yeah, I thought we'd do the just the exact opposite for the happy season, and maybe only talk about Grimm films, because I shouldn't be allowed to plan things, is the big takeaway here, I think. If this feels weird and out of place, just think of it as being exactly like Wholesome Halloween, except instead it's called Not So Wholesome Christmas. Smooth. Nailed it. Moving on. The final film I want to recommend is not bleak and miserable. I mean, it's certainly a horror and it's one that explores financial desperation, but it's one that keeps the Christmas spirit and the hope and love of the holiday firmly in its heart. And that is A Very Uncommon Christmas, which I co-wrote. Ha! That's right! This whole video is just an excuse to plug my own shit, and the sunk cost fallacy says you're too far gone into this to leave now. Jokes aside, and obviously I am biased on this one, I do think this is a great story, and I'm very proud of my role in it. And I also think that we might have made the most Christmassy horror film to ever exist. I know that sounds big-headed, and again, I'll put my hands up, I am completely biased in this obviously, but we truly made this thing with a real love of the holidays and the powers it has on friendship and family in mind. It's kind of a blueprint of exactly what I want out of Christmas horror. It's filled with wholesome Christmas spirit and friendship and fun, but never at the expense of glossing over real issues. The film was made as the final episode of the Uncommon Horror Anthology web series, available now on Amazon Prime Video. Just saying. Which featured various working class characters being sprung unexpectedly into horror comedy situations. The film follows Anth and Chris, two friends down on their luck, and with almost no money to their name. Feeling desperate and with no other options, the two spend the last little amount of cash they have to buy a shotgun so they can rob the local bookies. But when the two prove to be somewhat inept at their criminal activities and things are further complicated by a zombie outbreak, they have to decide what's more important, their money or their lives. And I don't want to spoil any more of it, but needless to say, I do think it's pretty damn good. And you know, we did win a Royal Television Society Award for it, so I guess other people do too, but you know, who's counting? Who's counting? Anyway, that brings you entirely up to speed with this weird and wonderful subgenre. And after the year we've all had, this felt like the appropriate video to make because shit's stressful. And I don't know about you all, but if I have to watch a Hallmark movie telling me about the wonders of friends and family getting together when I can't even see most of mine, I'm gonna go insane. So this kind of stuff is gonna be the thing that brings me comfort this holiday season. And I wanted to spotlight it in case it managed to help out any of you guys too. I hope you're all safe and that you have a wonderful time in spite of everything. I just want to take a moment now to say a big thank you to my patrons you'll see being credited on the screen right now. Special shout outs to Emily Thompson, Julia Falkenberg, Trash Panda, Infamous K, and The Boots Are On. This was a bit of a tricky video to make in amongst all of the other stuff going on in my real life right now with tight work deadlines and getting everything ready for the holidays, but their contributions recently helped me get a teleprompter, which sped things up significantly. If you enjoyed this at all, please do consider giving it a like and a comment, and consider subscribing to my Only Dans at the red button below. And if you really liked it and would like a chance to get in these credits yourself, as well as gain access to exclusive perks such as the Dan Drambles Discord server, as well as exclusive videos like my Patreon Q&A and short split-screen horror film Home, then please consider becoming a patron. There's a special early Dan's tier running at the moment where the first 100 patrons will gain access to all digital rewards going forward, regardless of what amount they choose to become a patron at. If you can't afford that right now, I get it, money's tight, don't worry about it. You can still support the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing and sharing. Thank you all for welcoming me back after Wholesome Halloween with open arms. I wish you all an extremely happy holidays, stay safe, and I'll see you all again in the new year.